That literally has never happened to me before. I'm
That's
sorry that hopefully that didn't cause any issues.
No, that's all right. That's all right. We'll be a few minutes behind, but we're good. And we are live. So, hello everyone. This is Rebel One Live. We have our first VC guest tonight, Helene Servillon. She is a cannabis investor, so appropriate. We didn't do this on 420 so that everyone who celebrates 420 can celebrate properly. And then today we can talk about cannabis investing. So thanks for joining us today, Helene.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, and happy belated 420 to everybody out there who celebrated and to everybody who just learned about it.
Great. It's awesome. So we'll dive right in. Helene, I've known for a while. She's a friend, and then also has been through the Rebel One Investor Training Program as well, and she is running her own fund and in the middle of that process of establishing it and moving forward. But she's has a portfolio of cannabis investments and also a background in entrepreneurship. I wanted to know if we can kick off and if you can share a little bit more about how you made it to partner at JourneyOne and also Greater Holdings.
Wow. So where do we begin? So many different directions we can go into, but I think when I first got started in the cannabis industry, it was mid 2017. And prior to that, I've always worked in emerging markets. So I was in the electric bike industry in 2012 when that was before bike share hit the ground in the US. And everybody was like, what are you doing working in the electric bike industry? What is that? Um, so that was a great first time experience of working in a very nascent market that people were very unfamiliar with. From the electric bike industry, I ended up working into for a voice analytics startup out of San Francisco called VoiceSpace, and really got my feet wet in the tech industry. And from there, I ran a customer success team and was having strategic partner marketing with accounts like AWS and Twilio. So really got to understand how the tech world worked and the latest trends in tech, such as AI, machine learning. And I learned so much in my 20s, and I think Sergi and I both went to Northeastern University, which has a great co-op program. And I always look back at how did I end up where I am now. And what the co-op program taught me was to really explore and challenge yourself with different type of industries and interests that you have for work. So I basically took my 20s and co-opted that. And in doing so, I've always had innate tenacity for challenge, but I wanted to channel that into something that I was really, really passionate about. Not just, I don't look at work as something that pays the bills. It's more of a space that speaks to who I am. And so I wanted to channel that energy into an industry that really aligned with my vision and the culture that, I surround myself with. So when in mid 2017, I started hearing about the fruition of the recreational cannabis market in California. And, it went medically legal in 1996. And it was the first state to do medicinal cannabis legalized. And I saw the opportunity, was really intrigued, and started literally just like going and hustling to networking events, asking people, what they knew about the industry, and subscribing to every newsletter that I can and every podcast that I could. So I literally just started reaching out to a few folks in my network and said, I'm really interested in pivoting from being an operator, and I want to move into cannabis, and I want to move into venture capital. And at that time, there were very little cannabis investors in the space, and it was really challenging to even really follow a lot of who. There was no standard for who the thought leaders were at the time, in my opinion. So I had luckily reached out to a friend who connected me with one of his angel investors, So I worked with the group for a little under a year to lead their portfolio strategy. And they were one of the first cannabis investors in Y Combinator's first fleet of cannabis companies. And that includes Meadow and Confident Cannabis. So that was the initial foray.
And for you said a number of things. So I wanted to backtrack. What was for when you shifted from working in a startup to and the startup was focused on electric bicycles? How did you make that shift? Like, what helped you? You basically changed industries of focus, right? So what helped you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I made a couple of pivots. Even before electric bikes, I worked at Puma and Reebok corporate. And so I think how I did that was essentially I made a training guide, a personal one, where I put together a list of different terms and vernacular that I need to understand. I'm in different mechanics of, a bike and how to speak to engineers and factory owners. And also, work in different cultures. At a very young age, I was 22 and they sent me to go to these trade shows across the world by myself. So I went to Germany and Taiwan and China, and had to build this, electric bike business from the ground. And it was literally just like hustling my way and going through football field size hangars of bike companies.
And when you made that shift though, for you, and you were just starting out, did you? It was mainly in California, right? At the time.
Into cannabis.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of where I focused my interest in the industry.
Yep.
Yeah. So, if you look at the cannabis industry as a whole, there's 33 medicinal states and a little over a dozen recreational markets now in the US. And each individual state has its own governing bodies and regulations. So you almost want to think about it as 33 separate countries. And my focus was primarily in California. I would say the first 6 months. And then I got to a year of understanding the industry and had interest and made contacts with folks in Colorado, in Oregon and Washington. But understanding the nuances of the California market alone was really challenging because the supply chain is very fragmented.
Is that a problem? I mean, for people that don't know Helene. Helene, I'll call you out in making that transition. You make it sound really easy. Helene is a assiduous networker, right? She goes out, knows everyone. She goes to every event, talks to, she knows who's who and what's what. So I'm sure the transition and the hustle of where you are now, you're I just want to give you credit where credit's due in doing that. And then now in the space, every time I think of a cannabis, and if I hear of a cannabis investment, I'm like, send it to Helene. Like, even if I don't, I'm like, you know what, I wouldn't invest in this, but Helene should know about it, and she probably does know about it already. So I'm going to pass it along, and the connection in the space. But wanted to share. You talk about the 30 different countries and thinking of it that way. What are some of the other challenges, the unique challenges of investing in this space?
Oh man, it's a myriad of challenges. I think the regulatory landscape in itself is one that you have to know. And so, in terms of that, let's break it down in a couple of things. Supply chain, understanding the supply chain and operations of how,
each state, right?
Well, let's stick with California for starters, and then we can go a little wider.
Yep.
So, because, California has a lot of heritage within cannabis in the illicit market, and in the recreational market, even though Colorado has, a couple of years on California's rec market. So if we want to break it down to what are the major challenges, I would say, the fragmented supply chain creates a lot of different hurdles. in terms of quality of product, capital access. So making sure that the companies you're investing in and the partners that they work with also have are working with suppliers that are going to survive the year is really important. So fragmented supply chain, I would say capital strength, and also regulatory landscape is a big one. Making sure you always understand what different nuances with taxes and also how each municipality is governing the laws within that that region is important, because we also have what the state laws are and the local and municipal laws. So it's, you know, in any highly regulated market, for example, you know, what Uber and Lyft had to do is that they had lots of lobbyists to help them pioneer and shift how laws used to be so that they could, you know, help provide a path for them to succeed and grow market share and scale their businesses, because before the infrastructure was not made for them. So in terms of what I mean by fragmented supply chain, so if you look at California in particular, a lot of the companies that initially raised capital were building vertically integrated operations. And the reason why they were building vertically integrated operations is because, you know, if I'm you know, Helene's brownie company, let's, for example, back in the day, I needed to extract my own oil and also manufacture my own goods to make my product. If you look at other industries outside of cannabis, in traditional CPG, you have a plethora of different suppliers to choose from. It might be even like, you might even have like option paralysis, and you have, you know, hundreds of different co-manufacturers across the nation that can make your product. So, you know, those are some of the nuances when you're looking at cannabis investment. And so that's one category that we can go down, but lots of different rabbit holes.
No, I appreciate that. I spoke to a friend of mine that's a lawyer focused on cannabis, but in New Jersey, not San Francisco. San Francisco is much more advanced and robust, and he dived into exactly this. It's from the, you know, from the payments to the logistics, infrastructure, manufacturing, lots of challenges in that space. So can you share a little bit more about what's happened traditionally when we were looking at cannabis investments there?
Yeah.
They were, you know, I would say overvalued, but to the market, because there's such a large opportunity. It's a whole industry that I wouldn't even say it's a new industry. It's an industry that's being legitimized. You know, what are some unique characteristics you look for when you're looking at these investments?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the interesting thing about being a cannabis investor now versus being a cannabis investor when I first started, and when the markets initially opened recreationally, is that we have a lot more data and we have a lot more learnings. There's a saying of, you know, it's great to be a pioneer, but the people who really survive are the settlers. And so what I mean by that is, even if we go back to the conversation about nascent supply chain, now we have a more richer infrastructure to invest into, which enables different types of companies. So if you look at the past 2 years in the specifically the West Coast and California market, investing in supply chain and building, you know, you saw the best distributors come to market, and also cultivators for flower, and then also processing extraction for distillate oil to make products like edibles. And now we have co-manufacturers. In 2019, we launched beverages in California. And so there's different characteristics of what makes a good looking company now that's very different from 2 years from today. The areas that I look at for in JourneyOne, I've categorized as culture, technology, and also health sciences. And what that looks like is, for me, culture is a bigger, broader category than just consumer brands. I look at it as, companies that really shift and shape culture, will shift and shape movements, and also have very loyal customers. So if you look at the alcohol and the kind of tobacco industry, you see that it's not just, these aren't just products, right? They permeate everything in pop culture, in music and entertainment, in professional and personal. So in terms of, the culture category, we can break it down into consumer brands, ancillary products like smoking devices or rolling trays, or brands that can create products like that. If you think about all the sub brands that were created around Apple products, those are massive companies in themselves. And then also just general consumer goods. The second category of technology is like fundamental businesses that power the industry. So, the POS, which is essentially the operating system that powers dispensaries, I would say that ship has sailed in terms of most of the, we have category leaders in that space now that are raising growth rounds. Green Bits, for example, I think they're in a dozen and a half states across the US. And they raised either something around $20 or $30 million growth round, with some coming from, notable investors. So we have POS systems, marketplaces, delivery, and now we're starting to see companies take off and enable direct to consumer, which is an investment that I did called Flower Company. So, that's interesting new technology that's going to open up different sales revenue for brands, because in the world of cannabis, direct to consumer is not that easy. You need, if I want to order something online from Helene's Brownies company, and I go to the website and check out, my delivery partner has to have a license. And when I pick up my product, they can't just drop it off at my front door. I need to show my driver's license and verification that I'm of age for this purchase. So that provides a lot of access to getting richer customer data if you enable D2C. And then the third category, health and sciences, I tend to talk about that category as data-driven and wellness-focused companies. So in terms of what that looks like, companies that are focused on mental health, sexual wellness, pet category, I think is going to be massive. So all of these type of sectors I look at as potentially highly scalable, where they can go to market in cannabis, but also have the opportunity to grow outside of the industry into different categories. But because cannabis is such a high growth market, there's easier, I wouldn't say easier, but I would say that it's an edge to be different in a sector where there's capital coming in, and it's even the word cannabis, when you're in a room full of investors, like there's not that many of them. So by nature, you're going to be more attracted by what's new.
Yep, absolutely. I want to walk to what you said about infrastructure, right? Like you talk about the point of sale systems, logistics, distribution, cash, movement of cash. Those are all unique challenges within the cannabis industry, because it's not federally legal, and then each state handles its own, and I didn't realize also the municipality has its own rules. What are you concerned at all in investing in some of these businesses when, let's say, it is federally legal, right? Like we'll cross that bridge at some point. Would these systems just move over from a unique POS that's focused on cannabis to just using the squares of the world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This industry is so nuanced that specializing specializing is very important. We have seed to sale tracking, and understanding, the different parties. It's important to be ingratiated in the industry, because this is an industry where people really, it's quite intimate. I wouldn't say the word is small. I would say intimate, in that everybody knows each other to some degree, even across state. So, bringing on business, it is very relationship based. And I think understanding who the different stakeholders, and getting some big clients takes relationships, just like any industry. But in terms of the nuance of like an ancillary company specializing in cannabis, like why that's important, is because of the compliance and regulatory tracking that's needed. And so, Square now is offering CBD they're taking on CBD companies. They did like a beta rollout, I think sometime last year, in the middle of the year. And that was a big move for them because they're a massive company. But, hemp is kind of in this like ambiguous state of the Farm Bill legalized industrial hemp, but different categories of hemp are still questionable. So if you are an ingestible product, the FDA is trying to figure out how do we regulate that to make sure that consumers are safe, and that products that are going into the market aren't just snake oil, and that what people are marketing and making claims for are justified. That's why we have the FDA, and we have, clinical trials for pharma companies, because you can't just sell a drug and say that it can help you go to sleep and cure your stomach pain if it hasn't really been tested. And we want to make sure that when you take a product that you're not just gonna, have an allergic reaction to it. So.
That brings up almost the opposite. There may be an opportunity further along, right? In the whole supply chain system, we don't have origin to consumption tracking, right? But it's necessary in the cannabis industry. So there may be learnings the other way as well, as it goes forward.
Yeah, like I'm trying to see if I have product. I have so much product, but in my bar cabinet, which I should call my cannabis cabinet. Most what you see on packaging, this is one of, the companies that I advise, Potly. This is cannabis infused honey. They will have a batch number, and you'll see when this batch was actually packaged. And sometimes we don't really get that granularity in the regular food market. But this industry is so highly regulated that the regulated and approved products are quality in terms of safety.
I want to shift gears a little bit in the opportunistic fashion for entrepreneurs walking into the space right now. What do you think? Where would you send them? They said, I want to, I've been a consumer, really excited about the industry, and I've been an entrepreneur in other areas. I want to enter this one. What would you tell them?
Well, there's so many different directions that you can go into. The reason why I truly love this industry is that it permeates every major industry that you can think of. I've mentioned tobacco and alcohol, and also consumer product goods, technology, even like HVAC. It's ridiculous, and agriculture. So, where I always kind of center myself is, what are my strengths? Or ask yourself, what are your strengths? How could you provide those strengths and value to a company, or to start a new company that could be, very fundamental in this industry? I don't think it's not a very easy industry to work in. There's lots of different hurdles to suss out when you start a cannabis business. I mean, I've never seen so many lawyers on a startup company team. You got like 2 or 3. You have your corporate lawyer, you have your compliance lawyer, and then you have just like another lawyer making sure everything is good and checked in place. And then, capital is a bit challenging in this area, which is makes it a great opportunity for me to find good deals. But if you think about the world of venture capital, I would say maybe less than 1% goes to cannabis funding. And so the reason for that is that, it's still federally illegal. And a big fund like Andreessen Horowitz or First Round Capital, they might have, their limited partners who were investors in their fund that are institutional LPs and government-related entities that have clauses in their agreements that they can't invest in cannabis. So it creates a lot of different roadblocks to getting access to capital. But the fun and exciting part about being an entrepreneur in this space is that everything that this industry does is really derived on a plant that has like long medicinal and social history. We just really learned about the endocannabinoid system in the 70s. And if not many people even know what the endocannabinoid system is, but it essentially regulates homeostasis and balance in the body. And so we have two receptors in the body. We naturally make cannabinoids, but the plant also has a variety of different cannabinoids. There's about 130 different cannabinoids in the plant, and we know about like a couple of dozen. So, from a high level, we study 3% of the plant, and that leaves 97% open for innovation. And so, for entrepreneurs out there, even though the industry is thriving and booming, we still are learning as we're going. Every day and every week that I look at market news, it's like this industry travels faster than anything I've ever been in before in my entire life, and I live a pretty fast-paced life, so it keeps me on my toes.
What is it about let's flip to the investor. It's like if I'm walking into this industry, networking and knowing my regulatory landscape, knowing who the players are locally, getting to meet them so that there's those relationships. But since the pace of change is so fast, what else can investors do to get smart on the area as they're entering the cannabis space?
Yeah, I think my recommendation is to it's hard to kind of do cannabis as an investor. So for example, like I've seen a couple of companies that have been invested in and they have no cannabis expertise on their cap table, but have been able to raise a good chunk of money. And I'm talking about like maybe $3 to $5 million in really interesting companies, but they're more like tech enabled companies. They're not really cannabis companies. They might have something basic, just like hemp extract with MCT oil in their formulation. And I think, it's important to really understand the landscape and work with a trusted expert, so, one way that I would approach if you are getting acclimated to the space is follow industry reports on a weekly basis. One of my favorite resources is New Cannabis Ventures. And Alan has been one of the oldest finance guys in the market. He has really sound content. I really respect the content that he has. And then also look at data. There are data sets like BDS Analytics and Headset that provide, free reports on growth in the market and different categories of growth. So you can dissect, what's happening in the consumer product goods space of dispensaries, like what's selling the most. Is it flower? Is it pre-rolls? Is it concentrates or edibles? So, in every major city, there are cannabis groups. And one of my favorite things about this space is that inherently it's diverse. I think the heritage of where this industry started was very grassroots and was very kind of very against the grain. And so I think what that lends itself to is, diverse investment opportunities across the US. Before, my first year and a half in cannabis, I was really focused on the West Coast market. And this past year in 2019, I started traveling a bit more. So I spent a good amount of time in New York and in Massachusetts because I lived out there for almost 8 years. And then earlier this year, I was in Chicago. And the Chicago market opened up in January and did like 100 million in 3 months of revenue. So that's pretty exciting. So it really, I would say like start where you're located as a primary. And if that market's not really hot, then go somewhere closer to that region, because I have people from when I was in the bike industry and when I was in the tech industry and when I was working like a decade ago at Puma and Reebok, who are reaching out to me now and saying, hey, I really want to learn about cannabis. I'd love to have a chat with you and see, what you're up to. And some of them are asking like, hey, we really want to invest in cannabis. What are your thoughts and opinions about that? So, I think there's so many different angles that you can start at. And it just depends on what your expertise is. And I would say lean into that first.
Okay, great. Well, one last question I wanted to ask is it's more of an opinion on how and what needs to happen at the policy level. I know some of these cities, they're especially Chicago, they were rolling out, right? They gave a limited number of license. They allowed those people that had license to open new businesses when, really there's a little bit of conflict, right? You're trying to, you there, Helene? Oh, we might have lost Helene. Helene, you there? Oh, let's see.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Gotcha, Helene. Hello, you there? Oh, it looks like we lost Helene, but that was Helene Servillon she was a partner at JourneyOne Ventures, sharing more about the cannabis VC space. Next up, we're going to have Catherine Cooper, who's going to talk about innovation in the healthcare space. Amazing VC, also out of Los Angeles. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. I'll do the intro when we get there.